A joint hybrid outreach event organized by EFRAG and the ISSB on the ISSB Agenda consultation and the ISSB internationalization of SASB Standards. We are delighted that we have quite some number of people here in the rooms that you can see on the screen, but we are even more delighted that we have nearly 1,000 people lined up online, either watching us now live or perhaps looking at the recording and listening to the recording afterwards. So you are aware that you can be seen by many here. I will immediately hand over to Patrick de Cambourg, who will make his messages to you. Patrick is the chair of our EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board, and I guess actually you need not much introduction, Patrick, because I think you are well known all over Europe and perhaps all over the world. But Patrick was the former president of the French standard setter ANC, and also he chaired both our project task forces. Actually, you have all the bios of the speakers on the website, so if you want more about the career of Patrick, you can look there. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much. At the moment, we only are interested by the recognition in Brussels in this meeting and online. So welcome to all. This is a very interesting event that is being organized jointly by the ISSB and by EFRAG. As you have seen, we have submitted our draft comment letters for public consultation recently. So we encourage all participants to have a look at that, and also following the discussions that will be held today to offer their own comments. The process in EFRAG is, as you know, that following the public consultation, we will fine-tune and take on board the feedback we will receive from stakeholders in order to provide our final comments to the ISSB on their two requests for information. So without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce the distinguished guests that we have. To start with, from the ISSB, so we have Jenny BofingerSchuster. I hope I pronounce your name right. Okay, thank you. Who is an ISSB board member and who previously was operating in a very large German company on those matters. So welcome, Jenny. We are proud to have you with us. You have also with you three distinguished members from the ISSB staff: Francesca Recanati, Corey Walrode, and Laura Girella. Laura also worked with us during the task force, so I'm particularly happy to say hello to Laura. So great to have you with us. On the EFRAG side, we have, in addition to Saskia, Slomp, and you are universally known, so you don't need an introduction. We also have Chiara del Prete, who is the SRB TAG chair and also the IFASS chair. So she has also an international role. We have Wim Bartels, a member of the Sustainability Reporting Board. We have Sigurt, who is the acting vice chair of our technical expert group. And finally, we have Pedro Faria, who is our environmental lead. So with all those good people, in the interest of time, I will not be longer because, I was struck by the fact that we only had 2 hours for so important topics, but I'm sure you will be efficient. So without further ado, Jenny, I think it is for you now to go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patrick, also for the very warm welcome. I'm very much looking forward to today's meeting because it's a very important milestone for us as we are now entering into the next phase of our standard setting, and we are now very much looking for the next topics that we have to look into. And as a standard setter, you know, we very much depend on feedback, and that's why we are having these consultation rounds. And so we very much value and we are very thankful that you are taking the time today to dial in and to have this discussion with us. Thank you, EFRAG, for hosting all this. And again, this is very much value adding for us, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion.
I apologize because I missed one point that I had to mention, that you will have polling questions which you can, you see them on screen now, that you can answer, but it's so familiar now to everybody that I think that you had understood even if I had forgotten to mention it.
Yeah, and there are already many people participating, as we can see here, and I'm very curious to see what others is. So I see 37% currently with others, and it says please specify. So that would be very interesting for us to also then get the specification. So please also share that with us. And thank you, Patrick, for pointing to the Slido. Okay. All right. Shall we go to the first slides, or shall we look at the poll for a second? What's the plan?
Saskia, as you wish.
Yeah, I think so. Patrick, you said everybody is familiar. We are using today the Slido system, also for the people here in the room. So you have at the side on the slide this where you can do your scan, the QR code, so then you can in. And we really like, I mean, we see our 52 people have responded, but I understood we are 1,000 registrants, so we are far from that. So you can have it on your mobile phone and so on. You can also ask your questions with the same tool. So if you go into it, you are either in polling or frequently asked questions. So if you put your questions there, also if you are in the room and you have this like function, then we can see which questions you like best. You can do it all the time during the meeting, and we will then pick up some of the questions if time allows, but we'll also, it's very important that you do as well the polling questions, even if we cannot discuss them all, so that we have the feedback from you, which is both important for the ISSB and for us in developing our response further, and the ISSB their choices. So that's with that, I think we can go to the first panel. And the first panel is on research projects, biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services, human capital, and human rights. And I think the first one is going to present for us is Francesca.
Yes. So, let's just see if I.
Can we have?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Let's see if there are 3 first slides for Jenny, maybe, and then I can start. So the very first thing. I do. I can. Okay. Okay. So. Okay. So, Jenny, can you?
Okay. All right. So then, if we look at the first slide to give you an update on and a framing on where we stand. So, as most of you probably know, we are about to publish our first 2 standards. So, it's the general framework and climate. And now, in the next 2 bullets that you see on the slide, it's 2 consultations that we currently have open. One is on the agenda priorities, so informing on our next 2-year then work plan. And also there is an agenda consultation open where we are asking for feedback on the maintenance of the SASB standards. Both of this will be focused on today and will be run through this now point by point with the experts involved and have then dedicated discussions on these both topics that are open for feedback right now. And then, in addition, that you see what we are working on overall, we are of course working on enhancing the SASB standards overall, as the SASB standards are now a very important part of our work. And of course, we are also looking into how we can overall then work on capacity building and other topics. If we go to the next slide. Oh, and I forgot the disclosure taxonomy. Obviously, taxonomy is key. The word is more and more digitalized now as reporting, and I'm also convinced that this will be very important for sustainability reporting overall. So our consultation is now open, and again, we very much depend on feedback and input. So it's great that you are participating today, and it would then also be great to receiving your feedback. We are looking here into a 2-year work plan because we do believe that with the dynamics that we see around sustainability, we do want to allow also for a certain flexibility and see how topics are then developing. And that's where we are in, and we are very much again looking for your feedback. If we then go to the next slide. We are searching feedback actually on 3 topics. Again, all of this will be now then the program of today, and we'll run you through that one by one so that you get all information that you need for then also building your opinion. One is what should be our overall strategic direction, and how can we also best in the interest of our stakeholder balance our ISSB activities. Second is which decision criteria should we really use to then also prioritize potential new projects? And this is then also what we will start then about now, which are, so to say, the next subject matter topics to look into based on existing research and also on past outreach activities. We have a pre-selection, and this is around biodiversity, but human capital, human rights, and integration in reporting. And this is now what we're going to look into. And with that, I can then directly hand it over to you, Francesca, to look into the first topic and share with us what we have prepared here.
Thank you, Jenny. So let's start with the last point, or the third point, but that's really the core of this consultation on agenda priority. So if you go to the next slide. So like, as I said, so this is the core. So these are the potential new research projects, which are the area we are seeking the most feedback. So it's really the core of the agenda. So as Jenny mentioned before, through research and engagement, so the process is summarized in the RFI. And we identified 4 priority potential projects. And so we have 3 that are research projects on the sustainability-related risks and opportunities associated with, the first one is basically nature beyond climate, so it's biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services. Then we have human capital and human rights. And then we have a 4th project on integration and reporting. So in the request for information, you have a description of each project, and it includes a description of the broad topic, an explanation of why it is important for the ISSB and its stakeholders, and a description of the potential ISSB project, including potential objectives, materials that we may consider. And so in the next slides, I will give more detail on the very first 3 projects, and then Laura will present the 4th project later in this meeting. So if you go to the next slide. So the first project is on biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services. And we selected this broad topic because we recognize the importance of considering and disclosing nature-related risks and opportunities to investors, of course, beyond climate. So why? So mainly because, of course, the degradation, you probably know all better than me, but the degradation and loss of nature, it's like threaten financial stability, and business activities are affected by this, but they also can contribute to the preservation, restoration, and maintenance of nature. And so, as I said, this is a broad topic that basically encompasses nature beyond climate, and we know that there are a lot of subtopics, and we provided a list of potential subtopics we can prioritize while doing the research on this topic in the next 2 years. So the next project, so if you go to the next slide, is on human capital. And so as for the previous project, again, we acknowledge the importance of this broad topic in affecting the value of a company by enhancing the company's ability to, for example, attract and retain talent and innovate, just to mention a couple. And under this broad umbrella, we provided a list of potential subtopics we can prioritize, and of course we are seeking for feedbacks on this. Just to name again a few, we have diversion, equity and inclusion, and labor conditions. And I just wanted to emphasize one point here, as it's everything written in the RFI, but we are aware of the overlaps between human capital and the next topic, that it's human right. And like one of the aim of our research project, if we will add it in our work plan, is really to explore like these overlaps, especially at the subtopic level. But like at this stage, how the project is described is like the main focus of human capital is on workforce of a company, the primary focus, while human rights, if you go to the next slide, please, is like the focus is more on value chain as it is framed right now. But of course, nothing is written in stone at this stage. And so like the human rights, for example, include the relationship between workers, communities, and customers in the value chain, so like workers in the value chain. But again, with the research, we will better define this broad topic. So like which questions are we asking about these three first projects? So if you go to the next slide, please. So we are, of course, there is a first question on relative priorities between the four projects that we will see later. But for the three sustainability topics, we are asking if there are priority subtopics, industries or sectors, and also if there are, let's say, priority materials we should consider in our research. And last slide for this first session, it's very important to highlight that all these projects, including the fourth project that Laura will present later, are all research projects. We are not at the standard setting phase because our due process required to do research before proceeding with a standard setting project. And with the research, we of course, we explore if a standard is required, if it is feasible, and so on and so forth. So at this stage, of course, we don't know yet the topic and the structure of our standard. And so our research will inform also this, let's say, that structure. And so we are not saying now that like S3 will be on biodiversity or nature and S4 will be on human capital. So we are one step back. Just wanted to emphasize that. That's all. I hand over to Chiara.
Then we go to Chiara, who's going to tell us a bit about the EFRAG position on these issues.
Good afternoon to all of you. As an introduction to what we explain in our letter, EFRAG is the advisor of the European Commission in developing the standards, and the CSRD stipulates that EFRAG in the ESRS should take into account to the greatest extent possible the work of the ISSB. So in this context, of course, supporting and contributing to the work of the ISSB, starting from the input on the agenda, is an integral part of what we do of our mandate. So the emphasis that we have put on interoperability between ESRS and IFRS is also justified on this basis. So moving to biodiversity. In general, we have a suggestion to foster interoperability for the ISSB, not only of biodiversity, but in general to look at our architecture. Because at the end of the day, we have been exposing that for comment, and it's something that is already being considered in practice and will facilitate the interoperability between the two systems. Now, when it comes to biodiversity, we disagree in our letter to the approach that described biodiversity so broadly with all the other topics in the same standard or in the same macro topic. So we have a structure with 4 different standards beyond climate: water, biodiversity, circular economy, and pollution, which mirror also the objectives of the European taxonomy and regulations. So they have been designed in order to facilitate the identification of the actions to transform the economy. So we think but Pedro will tell you more about these. Should the ISSB nevertheless go for a broad scope, we would suggest to avoid calling it biodiversity, not to generate confusion with our biodiversity standard, which is different in terms of focus. And our second best would be to suggest to call the standard nature. So at least it's aligned with what the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures is also doing. Now, in our letter, we have also included a list of sources that have been used in drafting our standards, and this is done separately for nature, human capital, human rights. But I will explain that in a moment. And we have also included the table with the articulation of topics, subtopics, and sub-subtopics, so to provide you with the detail of the architecture and the scope of the single specific subtopics, so then you may have a look at that in your research. Now, in terms of human capital in general, we applaud the intention to broaden the coverage and include social topics. But we express in our letter a concern about the idea of separating human capital from human rights, because it's basically this would generate or continue to generate a sort of misunderstanding that the two things are separate, while we see human rights as a sort of a floor for human capital. So human capital has to be built on the basis of the content of human rights. And linked to this, we also question the term human rights, because we think that the content should go beyond the intangible benefits for the undertaking to include also human rights considerations such as diversity, equity and inclusion, health and safety, compensation. So that's why we suggest rather to go for own workforce. More general on the architecture for the social, the Project Task Force lengthily discussed the articulation of the social topics before proposing in our public consultation this architecture. So we really suggest you to look at this. And we basically went for 4 different standards covering groups of affected people. So starting from own workforce, workers in the value chain, affected community, and consumers and users. So this is because the human rights element is pervasive to the 4 different categories. So it would be good for you to have a look at that. For human rights, we recommend that you incorporate and build on the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises and the UNGP guiding principles on business and human rights, also because they are deeply rooted into the due diligence concept. And due diligence is something that we have tried to incorporate as much as possible in our standards. And last, I would say, of course, we are willing to support you and assist in particular on the challenge of identifying the financial materiality element of the social standards.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chiara, for this. So we will now have a few questions to our panel. Like Patrick was explaining, we have Sigurt, Vitols and Pedro Faria in our panel, in addition to Chiara and Jenny. So we would first like to come back to the discussion that you just heard, but also the discussions we had in EFRAG between human capital and human rights. And also Francesca just said that there is overlap between the two and that research would take place. So Jenny, what's your view? Are you going to keep human rights and human capital as 2 separate topics? And what are your thoughts behind doing so or not doing so?
Thank you, Saskia, for this very good question. And also let me use this moment to thank the EFRAG team and particularly in this case then Chiara for giving us really very diligent, very useful feedback. The letter that you've composed is extremely helpful, and so thank you for this. Also because there wasn't actually much time to do so. So this is let me make sure that this is being acknowledged in the right way. So now to your questions on human rights and human capital. Well, first of all, also here we are at the very beginning now of this next phase, and we are sorting things out. So this is why we are having also this agenda consultation, and that's why we are looking for all this feedback. For now, human rights and human capital are regarded as two separate topics in our RFI. Because this is what we have heard so far in our past research and also past outreach activities. I do believe that our consultation phase now will help us to particularly better grasp subtopics, and with that then also the related metrics that it needs to really measure these subtopics. So I think that's one very important part. And yes, indeed, and that's also how it's been elaborated in the RFI. There are overlaps. Particularly also, and I think you've mentioned that, you have it in your letter, I think you've mentioned it also today, when it, for example, comes to labor rights. And so this is a challenge that we are aware of, and that's something we are sorting out. And this is then part of the outreach, and focus is now very much on the subtopics here. I also do believe there is a bit of a difference also when you look into, for example, the concepts of integrated reporting, where there is a differentiation between human capital and social capital. So this is also leading us for, if I call it now, an hypothesis for the future research projects to having it in two separate topics. But again, that said, we are looking forward to hearing feedback on this and to further shaping these topics.
Thank you, Jenny. Let's then go to Sig, because Sig is, of course, the expert on this topic, being from the trade unions and being the vice chair of our sustainability reporting tag. So, Sig, we heard Chiara saying that human rights would be seen as the floor for human capital, and also a suggestion for the change of name. So can you elaborate further, and can you also react to what Jenny was saying? Thanks.
Sure. Thanks. First of all, I'm delighted that we have a chance to give some input into this process, to share our experiences and our thinking with you. So I've been involved almost 3 years now with EFRAG, with this project in various phases, and particularly focusing on the social standards. Well, we have the advantage that the topics were basically outlined in the CSRD. But we did have to spend a lot of time discussing the architecture of our standards, and particularly in 29B of the article of the CSRD, we have 3 different groups of subtopics. So we did discuss this quite a lot. Why we think the distinction between human capital and human rights is artificial is that actually, if you look at the subtopics, so I'm taking a look at some of the subtopics you've listed in your RFI, that actually there are human rights behind each of those subtopics. So, for example, you have worker well-being. Well, that addresses health and safety, one of the 5 fundamental ILO rights. You also have diversity, equity, and inclusion. So behind that would be the freedom from discrimination, the right to anti-discrimination. And then, so yeah, labor conditions. So that very much deals with freedom of association, collective bargaining, and also a living wage, which many would consider a kind of a human right, a fundamental right. So again, we struggled with architecture, and in the end, we decided this division would be artificial, and instead use the architecture that Chiara just explained, that we oriented our standards around affected stakeholder groups rather than these kind of 3 areas that are outlined in the CSRD. Maybe I just add one other point here. So I just heard that the human rights would be focused mainly on value chain. I would very much caution against that. Human rights are really, really key for the own workforce, for employees. So we also have issues of inadequate wage, of collective bargaining, recognition of discrimination and things like that. So I'd really very much caution against this kind of approach. And again, urge to take a look at our approach, which is to use the affected stakeholder groups as the orienting principle. Thank you.
Steve, I think we have another follow-up question for you in relation to financial materiality, or as we call it, a lens for financial materiality. Do we have evidence, or can you see how human rights can be addressed through this special lens of financial materiality, and explain perhaps also a bit in relation to double materiality? Thanks.
Absolutely. So I agree this is a challenge. This is sort of an evolving area, how we report on human rights. I think we do have two frameworks, which Chiara mentioned, which guide our work on the impact materiality side, the UN guiding principles and the OECD due diligence guidance, so that, there's a very established set of concepts and language for impact materiality. And I think we all agree human rights have both a impact and a financial materiality aspect. And we see what happens when the media reports about child labor in a supply chain of a company, or when a factory collapses. So these are obviously material from both viewpoints, but it becomes challenging to report on these from a financial materiality.
Well, this is just breaking up when he wants to say the crucial words about financial materiality. Sika, are you back?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm back here. Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to refer you to, there's a very good working paper put out by SHIFT, that's an NGO dealing with human rights, which tries to look at the issue of living wage, or in relationship to human capital. I think that's a very interesting attempt. I think where you run into difficulties is that some social aspects are, very difficult, let's say, or ethically difficult to speak about in monetary terms. I'm thinking about the value of a life, the value of, preventing a child from working. So this is where we run into challenges in reporting from a financial materiality phase from that. So, and I assume you want to go beyond just reporting about fines and penalties and things like that, which we do require on that side. So thank you.
I don't know, Jenny, do you want briefly to come back, or shall we move to the other element on biodiversity and put some questions to Pedro there? But I give you first opportunity if you want to say something to Stig on this reaction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this response and sort of sharing here your experience on human rights and human capital. Speaking about the financial materiality of these topics, we do see a growing number of investors that, and I mean that's the feedback that we receive, that put emphasis on that very much want to see how companies are dealing with all the risks that are related to this, be it reputational risk, but be it also, you spoke about penalties, be it more and more stricter laws that we see in more and more countries on human rights. So how you deal with that as a company, what's your processes, who's overseeing this, what's your overall strategy, what are the disclosures, and how do you measure that you are doing this in the right way, is something that is gaining increasingly attention. We have also, by the way, looked into during our research for the, let's say, pre-selection of these topics. We have, for example, looked into a database that is covering 200,000 international earning calls and checked sort of which topics were mentioned there. And so also there such topics are being covered in a more frequent way. So we do let's see how the outreach is then going and what's the feedback that we are receiving. But we saw in our research a growing demand from investors on human rights and human capital both.
Thank you, Jenny. I think let's now move to biodiversity. So Chiara has explained already that the term as defined here is too broad for EFRAG, and also suggested that perhaps another term, if you would stick to the broad scope of this, would be nature. So we would be interested, Pedro, because you are on our environmental leader and our environmental specialist, to understand better sort of the concerns EFRAG has about this border, and how do you have the border on biodiversity, and how this fits with the architecture, because Chiara just explained that we have different standards. We have 5 standards in environmental. So if you could elaborate on that and explain to the public why we see the things differently.
Yeah. Thank you, Saskia, and good afternoon to all. I hope you can hear me well. So, I mean, I would say that EFRAG's response is driven by 2 main reasons. And one is quite pragmatic, and the other is more on the philosophical fundamentals of how we use transparency to manage the relationship between the human and economic activities and nature. The pragmatic reason is one of alignment. Yeah? EFRAG has defined for the environmental pillar 5 key topics for which it has dedicated standards, adopting an architecture that aligns with the 5 environmental objectives of the European taxonomy: climate, pollution, water and marine resources, biodiversity and ecosystems, and circular economy. And so if the ISSB also adopts this order of topics, these would maximize alignment at international level, and I'm sure that would be welcomed by many companies and investors worldwide. As I said, this is mainly a pragmatic choice, and for us would be obvious to support such choice. There is no doubt that there are different ways. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback.
You have an echo, in fact.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's gone. So there are different ways this information can be organized in topics. And the ESRS approach is one of many approaches. But this approach, EFRAG has publicly consulted on this architecture and on its standards, and we have not received any major concerns about this approach. And of course, ESRS has the advantage that it already exists, and being the first in a context of urgency and the need for scaling up transparency standards globally, adopting or adapting the ESRS structure on these aspects could be beneficial. Then we have also the more conceptual reasons for this choice. I mean, EFRAG has voiced the concern that including within biodiversity and ecosystem services aspects that address the different drivers of biodiversity loss, like pollution, water and resource use, and do it through the specific lens of ecosystems, may be insufficient to address these topics at the level that they require to drive business transformation. So while pollution is a driver of biodiversity loss, it's also first and maybe foremost a consequence of human activity that affects workers, affects human communities, affects goods and assets, all of which can be material from an investor perspective without necessarily be material through its link as a driver of biodiversity loss. Pollution is also generically an indicator of inefficient processes and products. Equally, for example, aspects of water scarcity can become material first and foremost due to social factors, even before having strong impacts on nature. And, the flows of materials through the economy with which we deal in the circular economy standard is an essential aspect of how to adapt our economies to be more like nature. But its approach requires a lens which is more fundamentally linked on how do we organize our production and consumption system more than measuring its ultimate impacts on nature. So my point is that in order to address the looming biodiversity crisis, yes, we do need transparency and metrics on the impacts on biodiversity and ecosystem services of our human activities. But we also need transparency on the drivers of those impacts. And we need to think of them through our human and economic lenses. So in the Anthropocene, we have to agree first among us, society, what changes we are willing to make to address our constant depletion of natural capital and our disruption of key ecological systems and functions. And we approaching these topics through the ways we have traditionally done so, our regulatory frameworks, considering also the regulatory frameworks that we have in place, may be a good idea. So for pollution, we have created regulatory instruments like command and control regulations, engineer risk management systems, and in many cases they work well. For water, we urgently need to pay more attention to issues on how we jointly decide on the sharing of scarce resources that are used for very diverse human purposes, besides their role in nature, which should be taken as a basic need. And for circular economy, we need changing rules and incentives to shift our production and consumption system in fundamental ways. We need more social and technological innovation, and finding ways to incentivize them through transparency, which is what the EFRAG topical standards ultimately also aim to do. So, concluding, we believe that having a very narrow focus or considering these narrowly, encapsulating them through the lens of biodiversity and ecosystems may lose aspects that are essential to drive the transformation that we want to achieve. And, thinking of the work of, for example, Donella Meadows, was a key scientist on systems change and also a key environmental thinker, we need transparency on our intermediate ends, in this case, protecting biodiversity and ecosystem services, but also on the intermediate means to do it. So how do we change, and are we changing the way we drive our economies? So if we are polluting, the way we are using resources and the way that they flow through our economy. This is, I would say, why we provided the feedback to this particular question of the ISSB consultation.
Thanks, Pedro. Calling on all of us on our behavior and then to make it all clear through transparency and explaining in detail the views of EFRAG on this topic on the border of biodiversity and the need of the different perspectives. So I'm looking at the IFRS Foundation, so I have Jenny and Francesca here. I don't know who of you want to react to this, or if you want to react, perhaps. So
I can start, Jenny, and then if you want to add, yeah. Okay, so first of all, all very good suggestions. This is exactly the type of feedback we are looking for. So basically, with this project, the main aim of this project was to give signal that we want to go beyond climate on the nature side, if you want. So we use this broad title by using the words that we were really collecting through our outreach and research. So those were really the main three. And under these, there were different subtopics. So people maybe sometimes use word, maybe now we are improving, but even last year, they were using biodiversity to say nature. So we tried to balance a bit what we were hearing, but what was instead meant. And so that's of course, is we try to combine this. And as I said before, thank you for the suggestion, because with these, let's say, project, if we will start it in the next 2 years, that's exactly what we have to understand. So how this broad topic can be, let's say, disaggregated, which are the best solution. And of course, we will have a look at your standards, and we want to hear from our other stakeholders if there are any other possible options to do so. And so that's exactly what we are looking for. And one last thing that you mentioned, we are also aware of the overlap with the social aspects. We try to include that in the description, and we will try, as soon as we have more standards, we'll try to understand how to deal with these connections between different topics, but that's definitely something to be considered and not consider these topics in isolation and silos. So thank you again for all the points you touched. Very, very useful. So Jenny, do you want to add something? It's fine.
Okay, if Jenny is fine, then we are going to the next topic that we want to discuss with you. Before that, I want to say there are some coming questions in, and I see many of these questions are in a way general questions. So we will try to take them at the total end of the general question. Of course, if you later on, or perhaps now, going to ask specific questions, we will try to answer them during the panel session. And also, I would like to hear, we are now going to start with a lot of polling questions, so we really would like you to answer it, even if we perhaps not all discuss them here in detail. They are very useful to us. So I see that there are many of you that are online but are not filling in these polling questions. So really, if you could do so, that will be super. So we're now going to the strategic direction and the balances of the ISSB activities. So we're going to see, are the selection criteria appropriate, the priority of the potential research project. And we do, like before, we have first the ISSB displaying their proposal, and then Chiara coming in and tell what EFRAG thinks of it. Francesca.
Thank you, Saskia. So just to start from where I left before, so the 4 new research projects, or better 3, the 4th one will be later, I presented before, are basically part one of the petals, as you can see from the chart in the slide, of the ISSB activity. So that's the darker blue petal that you see in the diagram on the right side of the slide. Then we have other 3 types of main activities that are what we call committed work. So it's work that is already started or will start soon, and I will provide you some additional detail in the next slide. So as you can see from these charts, all these activities are interrelated and overlaps a bit. And basically with the first set of questions that you find in the RFI, we are seeking for directional feedback on the prioritization of these activities to inform resource allocation. And so we are not seeking feedback on the structure or the content of the committed work. So again, the light blue petals and the core activities in the centers, but we are only seeking feedback on relative priorities between the petals, basically. And again, if you go to the next slide, to provide some details, I'm speaking about committed activities. So what are these committed activities? So we have three main or broad categories of activities. So the first one is the work that aimed at supporting the implementation of IFRS S1 and S2 that will be published in a couple of weeks, 10 days, including, for example, the development of additional guidance or educational material. The second group of activities is in enhancing the SASB standards, and this like part of these activities, like the consultation we published 1 month ago, more or less, and Corey will present you later. And so SASB standards, why we're working on the SASB standards, because basically these standards are now resources of the IFRS Foundation, and of course play a key role both in IFRS S1 as a required resource to be considered by companies while preparing disclosures, but also in IFRS S2 as a basis for the industry-based guidance. And the final group of activity is like what we call research targeted enhancement. So this type of work is really aims is sort of like additional to the supporting of implementation of IFRS S1 and S2 is really like work that aim at improving the quality of disclosure under S2. It's not the outcome of this project won't be a new version of the standards. It's a guidance that really try at least to support preparers in improving the quality of disclosure under S2. And in addition to these three petals, if you go to the next slide, we have what we call core activities that are basically involved in each activity we do. And these core activities are basically the connectivity with the ISSB on a daily basis, so in our daily job. The interoperability with other sustainability standard setters, as we are doing today, both jurisdictional but also voluntary ones. Last but not least is engaging with stakeholders. Again, we are doing this today. So these are all core activities. And so basically these are the activities we are asked, like we ask you about relative priorities. So this is the very first set of questions you find in the RFI. And then there is a second set of questions, if you go to the next slide, please, is on the criteria we consider and will consider to assess and select new projects. And I'm not going through all the 7 criteria we have, but like just to name a few, if a matter is pervasive or acute for companies, for example, that's one. But it's important to emphasize that these 7 criteria are very similar to those used by the IASB. And of course, in addition to these 7 criteria, the ISSB considered interoperability, since it's one of our core activities, with other jurisdictional and voluntary sustainability standard setters and framework providers in order to build the global baseline. And that's all for me, I think. And to
thank you. Just one remark from my side. You are filling in the polling questions. There is also a box where you actually can say, because this question is yes or no, so it would be very helpful if you can type in some reasons why you say yes or no. Obviously, we cannot discuss them all today, but we will take them into account in your responses. So now, handing back to Chiara.
Thank you. So on priorities and criteria, well, first to start, we recommend that you disclose the overall direction of travel. So also beyond the horizon of the 2 years, what is the universe of all the topics that are going to be covered? Because this will help to the community to have a sense of direction also in the long run. And also perhaps to provide an overall timetable you expect for the completion of this exercise, despite the fact that at this stage, of course, this timetable can only be indicative, because it's clear that you need to first progress and then see. Of course, we would like to see our topics covered in your work plan, all our topics. Now, looking at the priorities, we have attributed first priority to new research and standard setting projects, where we also include connectivity between financial and sustainability reporting. Now, I perfectly understand the view of having connectivity as a foundational element of whatever you do, as you also say for interoperability. But nevertheless, in this first phase where IFRS S1 has for the first time introduced this principle of connected information, at least we think it would be beneficial to have some initial activity to share a common language, educate a bit on what this means in practice, and this is also what EFRAG is going to do in its research project. So first priority, new research, new topics, basically, because in absence of topical standards, IFRS S2 per se, despite being a principle-based approach, doesn't necessarily provide for the necessary structure and granularity of the requirement, and ultimately also quality of the results. And we have the experience in Europe of the non-financial reporting directive, which was very much principle-based. Then the second priority should be to support the implementation of the ISSB standards S1 and S2, and to research targeted enhancements for climate adjacent disclosures, because this will increment the acceptability of those standards. And then the third is to enhance the SASB standards, and this is of particular interest for us in the context of our work plan, where we have to develop the sector standards. We are going to speak again about it toward the end of this panel. Now, moving to the criteria for selecting the topic, we have suggested to explicitly recognize the interoperability in the list of criteria for the selection of the topics, because of course synergies can be developed with other initiatives. So basically, we think that the ambition should be to synchronize the standard setting agendas as much as possible, because we think interoperability is more efficient if it's a two-way traffic, and so it's better if the developments occur at the same time. And finally, in terms of criteria, we have recommended to explicitly integrate in the first selection criteria, which mention investors' interest, the investors' interest in impact materiality, because there is a growing number of investors that base investment decisions explicitly on impacts, irrespective of their direct or indirect link with risks and opportunity, because they want, with their investment decision, to either avoid harming people or to make a positive impact for the planet. Important to note that EFRAG has not put forward any prioritization on the different projects and on the different topics, because we assume that from a European perspective, on the basis of the CSRD, all the topics have to be covered, all have equal importance. And of course, for all the public, it will be important for us to test this position, because at the end of the day, this is a draft position. We are going to reconsider it toward the end of the consultation period.
Thank you, Chiara. Now, Wim Bartels has joined us, so introduced by Patrick in the beginning of this event. Wim is one of the members of the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board. He is also the chair of the Sustainability Policy Group of Accountancy Europe. So Wim, welcome to you, and we are very interested to get some views of you. We would like first to address with you a topic that we discussed a lot in EFRAG, and I must say every presentation we do, we get questions about it, and that is interoperability. So, and you heard Francesca saying it's not one of the criteria, but it's sort of underlying a concept as well, whereas Chiara was at EFRAG clearly asked for interoperability as being one of the criteria, but perhaps you can also have, not only tell us if it should be a separate criterion, but also a bit more about interoperability, because also in the questions I see that this is coming up. So thank you, Wim.
Okay, thank you, Saskia, and a good day to all. On interoperability, it has been discussed extensively during our work at EFRAG, and also between EFRAG and ISSB, not least between the European Commission and ISSB. And it has been, I think, a kind of a fundamental topic, if you like, over the past, 9 to 12 months, where I think we are all aligned, and we see it in the ISSB's work plan and fundamentals, as well as the latest work from the European Commission and the final CSRD, that interoperability has been really required for obvious reasons to make the burden on companies and preparers as little, as small as possible, by avoiding double reporting, misunderstandings, interpretations, etc. So we have already worked very hard, I think, over the last months to get as much alignment as possible. We heard Chiara say that interoperability also has the dimension of timing, and I very much agree with that. We see now that because we are not synchronized in timing, that EFRAG came out first with the recommended standards, then ISSB working on its standards, coming out with close to final, and then European Commission further aligning. So you can see that further synchronizing the work plans would really help to achieve interoperability from the very start. But also, I think there is this element of interoperability in terms of structure and focus. So maybe that content element, just to highlight, and in the introduction earlier, you said clearly that ISSB has interoperability as a kind of a fundamental, I would call it, which we see in everything we together do. But at the same time, to make sure that when we look into matters, that we look also into the criterion of interoperability, to make sure that we are talking about same structures, same matters, so that we have that alignment from the very start. I think that is what we really would be suggesting from EFRAG's perspective. It's again great to see that we have it, all of us together, highest on our agenda, and it is in all our communication. So I think our comment is really to make it also operationalized, so to say, and with that to create further alignment and collaboration. So I think I would leave it to that for now, Saskia.
Okay. I'm going to ask Jenny to give a reaction, but perhaps, Jenny, you can also take into account, we have, I think, two questions here that are a bit related. To what extent is the ISSB process impacted by the latest ESRS consultations? And then the other one, where is this? Because I have to scroll on my screen. Well, it's a sort of summary. Why is the ISSB not taking ESRS as the starting point, like you do with SASB Standards, to advance faster and to ensure interoperability? So that together and a reaction on what Wim said would be great.
Okay, so then let's get me started, and let me also use this to motivate people to use Slido, because I see that the answers are coming in there, and there's still quite some changing in the responses. So it looks like your voice really counts then also in the outcome here. So use Slido there. Okay, so speaking about interoperability, and let me repeat what Francesca said, obviously interoperability, and Wim, you said that as well, this is really our joint duty to ensure that the users, the preparers, but also the users of the information and later on, that they can use our standards in a way that it is most efficient, and also disclosing the information that is targeted. So that's for us really a core activity, again, as this has been also shown in our activities that we are pursuing. So I think it's hard to use that as a criterion, and still, obviously, again, we are in a consultation phase, so we take this as a feedback to then also consider. And I would rather, for me, this is a given that we ensure interoperability on the topics that we are working on. And then in terms of which other standards are we taking, I think we said, as a starting point. And obviously, we are looking into existing standards, sort of all key existing standards, to understand what is there and to then, have a basis for this interoperability and to make this as easy as possible. We do not want to add complexity where it's not needed. The opposite is the case, that we really want to ensure, again, as you also perfectly said, that there is not sort of redundancies, that there is no double work and all this. So we are looking into existing standards to see how to best then set our standards up.
Thank you,
Was
Jenny.
that part of the question? I think those were the... Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then perhaps to Wim, I don't know, Cecile, can we have question 4 back, the results on the screen? Wim, could you give a sort of reflection, what we see as an answer to question 4, that the focus should be on integration in reporting and connectivity? We have carefully put the 2 words, I think, here. This is aligned with what EFRAG thinks, but this is a sort of European view, you think? And so perhaps, Wim, you want to reflect a bit on this?
Yeah, so sorry, Saskia, just to have clarity, you asked me to reflect on integration and connectivity, right? But I don't see the results on the screen, so that's why I'm checking it. Yeah.
Okay, no, and especially because of the 5 topics that we gave, actually the people, I don't know if you see it now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Here it is. Yeah, here it is. Yeah.
67%, which is very high compared to the other topics, to be honest.
Yeah. Now, first, maybe I must say that this is more on the question. We have, of course, here different answer options of different nature, right? Of different order. Different order. So we should take that into account, like biodiversity and human rights really being call it topics to focus on, and integration and reporting. Connectivity is much more about the process and the way to report. So but with that as a note, still, integration and reporting connectivity is highest. I can, reflecting on this and also looking at our response, the 2 are clearly also for us from EFRAG perspective an important element of reporting. As most of you will know, in the standards it is required to report in separate sustainability statements, but we have an option to include reporting by reference, and that is to allow for integration in reporting in other parts of the annual report where that seems appropriate. And if we look long term, then we are, I think, all of the same view that integration in reporting is the ultimate objective, noting that a company and a company's value, if we take the ISSB's perspective, is a combination of financial and non-financial information. For the ISSB, of course, mainly related to what it means in financial and value terms. For the EU, also what it means in terms of the value that the company creates for wider society. So call it impact. But all of that cannot be seen as silos. So we are, I think, clearly of the same ultimate objective. Now, connectivity is a somewhat different topic, where it is about the connection between the non-financials and the financials, and in particular the financial statements. We had discussions about that within the SRB, and reflecting on what does sustainability reporting mean for the balance sheet and the P&L, to call it simply like that, and of course the notes to the financial statements. And how should you connect the 2? And it appeared that is not a straightforward discussion. So we are really at the beginning, if you like, of connectivity, and in the coming years, I think we have to see how that is going to play out. We may all again be aware of the example of stranded assets. So that is then call it a relatively simple and easy one, but I know from work I did in the past, I was a member of the TCFD also in the past, that connecting climate risk to asset valuation created quite a few inconsistencies, so to say. So here we think that connectivity would be a priority over integration in reporting. A personal note is that I think that companies, I work with companies daily, that they have quite a challenge with all the upcoming reporting requirements on ESG. So we need to prioritize there, first of all, and then secondly, to then may be able to see what it means financially. That is also the key challenge, I think, that companies see. How do I assess financial materiality, and how do I relate it to my financial statements? That makes us think that that should be the priority, where integration in reporting can be seen as much broader beyond ESG, and again, not seeing that as irrelevant, not at all. We see similar objective, but it's a matter of prioritization. And then back, Saskia, to your question, I fully understand that this is so high because we are looking here at the interplay between non-financials and financials, and it's largely a new territory. That's also one of the good reasons why ISSB is working, I think, on the standards. So yeah, with that, Saskia, I think back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Wim, for this detailed explanation. This bridges us nicely to the next topic that we are going to address, the integration in reporting. So we learned already that it's important, but we will now see a bit different perspectives as well, given by first Laura to present the ISSB perspective, and then you get some comments of Chiara, how EFRAG is seeing this. Laura, you're the first.
Thank you so much, Saskia, and a pleasure to be here back with some EFRAG friends and colleagues. So let me start maybe with this integration in reporting. There have already been talks a little bit around it, with a terminological clarification about what we mean by connectivity at the IFRS Foundation, and why we decided to put forward in the ISSB as a possible project, integration in reporting. So probably how you have been able to see, and if not, that is one of the resources that we published some weeks ago. There has been an interesting article co-signed by the IASB and ISSB co-chairs of what we mean by connectivity within the IFRS Foundation. So the way we think about connectivity is mainly articulated into three layers. One being connectivity in process, how the IASB works together with the ISSB, which brings us to the connectivity in products, which is basically in their standard setting and how we set the standards. And the third layer being then connectivity in reports. So how then all this connectivity in the process and in the standards is translated into connectivity and a comprehensive corporate reporting view. So that is mainly to clarify what we mean by connectivity within the IFRS Foundation. Another point that both Chiara and Francesca mentioned before is that actually, does it mean that we don't care about connectivity? No. It is absolutely the contrary. As Francesca was mentioning before, connectivity is an inherent part of our daily work, working together with the IASB, making sure that the language is the same, and also making sure that that translates into a comprehensive corporate reporting and not a type of a silo type of reporting type of mindset. And so why we decided then to move forward to integration in reporting. That is also because, as Chiara was mentioning before, there is already some disclosure requirements around connected information in S1 and S2 that you haven't seen yet, at least not the final version, but will be out soon at the end of this month. And so we decided to build on that. So everything that I said before, connectivity being an inherent part of our daily work, but also the disclosure requirement and connected information, and how to take a step further, talking about then what does it mean to do integration in reporting, which then builds on connectivity, but it is not equal to connectivity. So what we mean then by integration in reporting, and that is quite explained also in the project description in the RFI, is about taking into consideration the trade-off and the synergies and interdependencies that exist between the resources and relationship that an organization, a company rely on in order to create value. And the second area where we think that this is important, this mindset of integration in reporting, is how the way in which the company creates value for itself and then for investors is also inextricably linked to the value creation to the others. So as I said, it is important to remind that we are not saying connectivity is not important. Connectivity is important, but that is something that we are already doing. Let's try to see how we can ensure also integration in reporting. And this is also where language is also important. We are not talking about integration of reporting. We are not talking about taking different reports and trying to pull them on together. We are talking about integration in reporting, meant as integration around the set of disclosure on sustainability and financial information, and making sure that the disclosure are actually interconnected also in terms of mindset within the organization. So what we are actually asking in the RFI around this fourth project description, the first question is about whether this topic is a priority vis-a-vis the development by the ISSB of the suite of standards. So should we prioritize integration in reporting? Should we prioritize the other projects that are in the RFI? Bearing in mind that, as Francesca was mentioning before, actually the main idea, at least at the moment, is to include in our work program 1, maximum 2 projects. That is going to be the priority for the next couple of years. So this is the first question. Is this project a priority vis-a-vis other projects? The second question is really around how we should work on this integration in reporting. Should we work as a formal joint project together with the IASB? Or should we maybe making sure that there are some point of contacts with the IASB, but without making this a formal joint project? And then the third question around this project description is the type of resources that we could possibly rely on, because actually there are already products, standards, frameworks out there that refer to this concept of integration in reporting. One being the International Integrated Reporting Framework, which was published back in 2013 by the IIRC, but also, for example, the Management Commentary ED that was published a couple of years ago by the IASB. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chiara for comments.
Thank you, Laura. Well, Wim has already anticipated a bit what we have in terms of our position. We consider that connectivity more than integration in reporting is a high priority. And I think here it's very important that we pause for a moment and we think about terminology, because it's important that we use consistent terminology so that we speak all the same languages. When we speak about connectivity, and EFRAG is starting a project on this, we refer to how to operationalize the principle of connected information that is already in IFRS S1 and also ESRS 1. So in other terms, what are the techniques to foster a connected reading, a cohesive reading of financial statements, sustainability statements, and other parts of the management report for Europe, management commentary, call it as you want for the other jurisdictions. So that is what we mean for project on connectivity, and it's true that the principle is already there, but still we think a lot needs to be done in terms of operationalizing, explaining it, really learn how to use these in practice. And so we hope to help you with the proactive research that EFRAG is currently launching. We say that connectivity more than integration in reporting is a priority. Why integration in reporting? We don't see it as an immediate step. First, because we think that a little bit more thinking is needed from a conceptual point of view before we are ready to think how to integrate the two dimensions. While the conceptual framework for financial reporting is something that we know very well, perhaps there is a need for something equivalent in sustainability reporting before we think how to integrate a bit the two dimensions, but also because we see integration in reporting as a large project that is going to absorb a lot of resources and draining forces away from the objective of completing first the topical standards. On how to work with ISSB, we haven't yet a position in our comment letter. It's important that I invite specifically our constituents that are going to reply to our survey in our letter that we would like to have your view on whether the ISSB, on how the ISB and the ISSB should work on this project, because we basically see that there are pros and cons in a joint project. While a project on the supervision of on the leadership of one of the two boards would have the benefit of a more simple decision making. So the alternative to a joint project would be a project of the ISSB or of the ISB with the input of the other board, but still with a clear decision making project. Because from experience, having two boards that have to deliberate on all the details of a drafting becomes something that is certainly an enemy of the timeliness of the project. We have been also, as EFRAG financial reporting, and I come from financial reporting, so that's why I can tell this, we have been intensively working on the management commentary project. So we have appreciated a lot, despite it not being endorsed for use in Europe, we have done quite a bit of work on that. So we recommend that when you start working and should you start working on integration in reporting, you take the best of the two frameworks, so integrated framework and management commentary, and explore how to further converge. I mean, you have seen already, because you have done some research and stuff, that there are a lot of similarities. So that's something that we would encourage to pursue.
Okay, thank you very much. So Chiara is referring to should it be the IASB or the ISSB or together jointly. So we have a polling question on that. Perhaps Cecilia, you can launch that as question number 7, if I'm right, so that we can get your views, because Chiara is clearly saying as well that we haven't expressed yet a view in our draft comment letter. We do have our own project on connectivity, so I don't know if that will be an example or not an example, but we will see. But perhaps we can first go to question 6. I don't know if this is all possible to get the results of 6 at the same time as question 7 is open. I have no idea how this all works. So we saw. Actually, a lot of people, and it may of course be entirely biased here and not reflecting of what the rest of the world is thinking, and perhaps not even what is the rest of Europe thinking, but they actually sort of seem to agree with EFRAG that connectivity should be the sort of first step. Perhaps it comes back. I don't know. I cannot see anything anymore on my screen, I'm afraid. So, Wim, I was going to put you on the spot again to see what you would be thinking of this answer that sort of our audience is giving to us, what comfort we take from that. And then I hope as well to get the results on the question 7, because that's probably also an interesting question process-wise, how we would see that.
Okay.
So
yeah, sure.
Perhaps you want to reflect already a little bit, and I think Perhaps you have said already things before, but.
Yeah, but Laura introduced two other elements of connectivity, rightly so, that I would like to highlight. So that is the connectivity of process and the connectivity of standards, and I think that is that is pretty critical also for the benefit of IASB and ISSB, but also because of the well, call it, now I should use the right word here, I think the interoperability of ESRS and current financial reporting. So the more that ISSB and IASB are connected and aligned, the better it is for those companies that need to report against ESRS and then also report under IFRS financially. Yeah, on the results, and again, you know, as you said, Saskia, it may be biased, so I don't take this, let's say, as a full truth of the full of Europe. But I let's say I can just see from my my practice on stepping a bit out of my EFRAG role here or adding to it, that this is really the key question for companies. I said it before, but we must not underestimate the impact of the double materiality concept on companies, realizing that there is this connection, and every one of us here may say, but that is logical, but, you know, it isn't. You know, we know for climate that it took quite some time to understand the connectivity and then the potential implications on financial statements, and that is, as I said, balance sheet, P&L, but also the risk paragraph, and lots need to be done there. So if I look at risk management in most companies is not aligned with the EU's request for risk management and reporting on it. So I can see from that perspective that many of us here today say, let us first focus on how we connect all this information, the non-financial information with the financial risks and opportunities with the financial statements, and let us first grasp that before we start looking into further integration of reporting. So I think it's really a matter of what first, so to say, rather than the one or the other. I think that is just what I would like to add to what I said before, Saskia.
So, Chiara, I think you get a little bit of answer from the polling question where it says as a small majority, it's getting up, be performed jointly through a formalized cooperation. Jenny, I'm going to you to see if you want to react on what you see here and to react what Wim said before, because he has addressed many aspects of both integrated reporting and connectivity, but also what we see on the screen now, 60%.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I personally am convinced, I'm speaking as a person, that it's key that the financial side and the sustainability side work together on all these topics. And so I think what we see on the screen is a bit similar, right? And is showing that the topics move closer and closer together, and that there is the wish from our audience here to work on this together. I assume that's now an assumption, that this is also because by doing so, there is the hope and the ambition that this gets easier sort of together, that, you know, speaking the same language, ensuring that same assumptions are used in financial and in non-financial reporting, and much, I mean, this is the beginning, right? And much more, there seems to be from what we see here, there seems to be the wish for that, and also the wish for doing this in a joint and formalized cooperation. And I think it was you, Saskia, who said that earlier, that this will and we also described that in our RFI, right? What the pros and cons of such a joint project would be, obviously making this in a process more complicated. And And this, I see this as a feedback point taken, and important for us to see that this is the wish from the audience here, and so this makes sense. What shall I respond to? Maybe I give that question actually to Laura, because I know how much passion Laura also brings to this topic. Laura, would you want to respond maybe to Wim?
Thank you, Jenny. No, just to add that, first of all, thank you for your comments and feedbacks. We know that EFRAG is currently doing this project on connectivity, and actually also to flag that also when it comes to integration in reporting or examples how companies can think about integration in reporting, that for sure it is a large project like all the other projects that actually are in the project description. We also know that there are more or less 2,500 organizations out there already doing some form of integrated reporting, applying the IA framework that could for sure help also other companies in better understanding how to think about integration in reporting. And not to say that integration in reporting here is a project on integrated report, the integrated report only, but for sure the integrated report and how it has been already applied by many companies around the world could for sure help companies and people to understand how that can be achieved. Just to flag that. Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, thank you very much. So we thought we would briefly go to the results of polling question 5, because that could be of interest as well. So Cecile is going to show them to us. She's nodding. She's sitting here at the back office, so we can see that. So from the criteria, and we appreciate it's not one criteria, but we wanted to figure out what people were seeing as the most important criteria. So from the perspective, I guess, of the work that the ISSB is doing, it might not necessarily be, or perhaps it's not the perspective of EFRAG, but you see actually that 2 of the criteria come up. So one is on importance to investors, and the other one is pervasiveness, or it's an impossible word, so you have to find another word for me, or how acute the issue is. So I don't know, Chiara, do you want to say something, or, open the floor to who is in the panel?
I don't know how much we can interpret from these, but if pervasiveness or how acute the issue is has been interpreted by who responded as a proxy of impact materiality, this gives us a feedback, that a good part of our audience actually think that these criterion should have a role in. Now we will never know, because the question wasn't phrased in this way, and rightly so. But of course, 50% importance to investors. I think this is in the DNA of the ISSB, so it's not surprising.
Yeah.
In our responses that we get, some of you have perhaps said some explanations as well. I think, Wim, you want to come in or not?
Yeah, just to add on the second point, and that from my perspective, the 2 are interrelated, right? So the importance to investors and the pervasiveness or how acute the issue is, where investors logically will be interested in all topics that could impact enterprise value as a whole. But of course, the more acute the topic is, the more urgent the need is for information about that. So I would say yes, as you said, I think Saskia or Chiara, I think this is in the DNA, importance to investors. And then the second tells me that the ISSB in its work plan would look at as a criterion at those topics that are shortest term, so to say, most acute. And that is an interesting perspective, because if we take climate, well, by now it is acute, but when we worked on it at the time, it wasn't acute, and still it was very timely to start working on it, and it was very important for investors. The only thing is they didn't fully realize at the time. So it is not an easy thing, I think, to define the most acute issues. It is not only the things that happen really tomorrow, because some things, and let's take biodiversity again, we should have worked on it for the last decades already, and now it can, in a number of years, it can suddenly become very acute, and then we are too late, like we are for climate. So short term should be interpreted or acuteness, I should say, or pervasiveness should be interpreted in the right way. It's not only short-term impact.
Thank you, Wim, for these reflections. We're now going to the last topic that we want to discuss with you. So it's about the SASB standards, the methodology, the objective, and the revision approaches, and the taxonomy update. So it's a whole bunch that we have for the last half hour or so. So we are first to have, let me see, Corey, I think, is going to present for the ISSB, and then Chiara again. So Corey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saskia. I do appreciate it. And I just wanted to echo the previous words of Jenny and my fellow staff members in terms of the feedback that we've received from EFRAG on their draft comment letter. Very valuable information, especially a lot of the information that you provided in the Appendix 1 has actually added value already in our process in terms of proofreading and internationalizing the SASB standards. Very helpful information. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. There you go. Thank you. With regard to the methodology, I'll presume that the stakeholders that are out there, as well as the folks in the EFRAG staff, have already gone through the objectives and constraints within the methodology exposure draft themselves. I just want to focus that really the goal here is to improve the usefulness and ease of application for cost-effective implementation of really the IFRS S1 in terms of providing source material to preparers to identify the risks and opportunities that are available to them. We are trying, of course, to preserve the original metric structure and intent of the original SASB standards, simply because we have a very large user base already out there. We've got at least in excess of 2,500 companies across 70 different jurisdictions. We don't want to necessarily pull the rug out from underneath them, but at the same time, we want to make sure that these standards can be applied internationally. We developed this really fairly simplistic set of revision approaches, 5 revision approaches, starting in terms of order of preference with international references. The second approach is to develop definitions within the metrics themselves. Third approach is to rely upon jurisdictional specifications for the individual preparers. Below that, if need be, we would have to remove some metrics simply because they are too jurisdiction specific in terms of their structure to be incorporated in a globalized SASB standards. And in some of those cases, we do replace them with broader, typically qualified discussion and analysis type metrics, simply to make sure that we've got enough information on the disclosure topics to allow the disclosure topics to be fully complete. Now, this is, of course, just the first step in a much longer-term process that the ISSB is going to take. Now, with regard to the draft comment letter that the EFRAG has developed, I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that EFRAG considers the methodology a reasonable transition approach in terms of improving the international applicability of the SASB standards. The draft comment letter does offer 2 possible improvements. The first of those is addressed as comparability. With regard to comparability, the comment letter suggests that the methodology should favor the use of approaches 1 and 2 over approach 3. As you can see from the slide, as you can see from the exposure draft, paragraphs 9, A3, A4, that is in fact the case. Typically, we try to provide those international references. We try to define the terms of each metric, the terms of reference, before we try to rely on jurisdictional specification, because we recognize that that will impair international comparability, although an investor within a specific jurisdiction will still have comparability. Across jurisdictions, there will be some impairment of comparability. Also, in terms of the draft comment letter, it recommends that approach 3 should require preparers to identify jurisdictional source references. And of course, in the exposure draft paragraph B8, it does precisely that. We do, when we are using this approach 3 in terms of using those jurisdictional specifications, we do request that the preparer provide that source reference so that investors and really understand what the basis of analysis is. There is one other improvement that the draft comment letter addresses, which is called considering ratification status. The comment letter suggests that the ISSB should develop and maintain essentially a database identifying international references cited in the SASB standards and the relevant ratification status of each of these references in every jurisdiction. It suggests that if an international reference is not widely ratified, the ISSB should provide a replacement metric to fill important gaps in ratification. They don't really define necessarily what importance gaps may be. They leave that to the ISSB. I think the key points here are that many of the international references that we're using and incorporating in this internationalization process are not necessarily sources requiring ratification. For instance, definitions out of the World Health Organization International Classification of Diseases. Many of these references are really industry trade association guidelines and best practices. For instance, IPICA. Many of these are from non-governmental organizations like the World Resources Institute, and others are simply reports from international bodies that, again, don't require ratification. For those sources which are ratifiable, local ratification, even then, may not necessarily be required for a preparer to understand how to apply the terms of reference within the metrics themselves. We will, of course, take this proposal under advisement, but we believe at this point that developing a database like this will be very resource intensive, and we really question the value to both investors and preparers given the relatively narrow scope of the methodology ED simply to improve the international applicability of the standards. Next slide, please. I just wanted to provide this as some context for the stakeholders out there. As you can see, the sectors around financials and healthcare tend to be those that are most entwined with a lot of these jurisdiction-specific references in the SASB standards. These numbers that you see on the right are still a little bit fungible because we're still working a lot of issues in those proposed revisions in financials and healthcare. But it gives you an idea of the scale of the issues that we're dealing with. Next slide, please. And with regard to your polling question number 9, the harmonization of the SASB taxonomy with the ESRS sector standards taxonomy. I think the key point here is that if you think about the digital tagging that's get down to the practical level, it really doesn't work if each specific data point is not fully interoperable. So each tag has to be tagged to a specific data structure and a specific data type. Of course, ESRS is developing their sector-specific standards right now. The harmonization, of course, would be a lot simpler if EFRAG relied to a large extent on the revised standards, that the revised SASB standards that will be published by year end. But just in terms of, from a practical standpoint, it's until the standards are developed, getting down to that detailed level of each digital tag, the proposal of harmonizing the SASB standards taxonomy and the SRS sector standards taxonomy really is a bit of a moot point. The second portion of this, of course, the request that the technical reference, essentially a database outside of or to back up the SASB standards taxonomy to essentially document the interoperability status of each of these thousands of digital tags is, again, very resource intensive. And we really have to ask ourselves, are the resources of the ISSB better poured into that effort to develop a database across these thousands of data points, or could we focus our resources elsewhere? And of course, the value to investors and preparers also has to be brought into question. I believe that this harmonization, it's really a fairly simple question that, yes, if you ask the question, do you support the harmonization of these two taxonomies, it's essentially the equivalent to say, yes, I support motherhood and, apple pie or apple strudel, depending on your jurisdiction. The key here is that these are, I think, an aspirational goal at this point. And I do believe that the question is really premature until we get a clearer view of exactly what those ESRS sector-specific standards look like. And then we can really get down to the nuts and bolts to develop that interoperability going forward. I don't believe that the SASB XBRL taxonomy is necessarily the tool to do that. We should really look at the metrics first and allow those to inform the taxonomy itself. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chiara for the EFRAG perspective.
One second. Corey, could you say a little bit, see in the chat, basically, that there is a bit of confusion to the request for information and this exposure draft. So can you a little bit explain the different nature, or I don't know if Jenny wants to do it, one of you, that might be helpful for the audience, so that we are really, and perhaps I should have said it, we are now back in the exposure draft, which is, and we are not in the request for information anymore. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Certainly.
Corey? Okay.
The methodology exposure draft is a separate work product from the RFI for Agenda Priorities consultation. It's simply a document to internationalize the SASB standards, to bring them up to a position that we can create a foundation for those preparers that are implementing IFRS S1, which will be published at the end of this month, to give them really as source material to identify likely disclosure topics around the risks and opportunities in the sustainability rated disclosure space that they should consider when they're developing their disclosures.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, Corey was already commenting a bit on the content of our letter, and was mentioning the fact that we have already made indeed some preparatory work. We in effect have in our work plan to issue the 39 sector ESRS in the next few years, and they will be reconciled with the 77 SASB industries, while being based on the European NACE classification approach. Now, in terms of what is our position in this draft comment letter, also in this case, as for the sector agnostic standard, we consider that interoperability is key, and is also the lens that we adopt in providing these comments. And why interoperability is important looking at the SASB standards. First, as the SASB standards are one of the obvious source for the development of the standards, we have incorporated as many SASB indicators as we could during the sector agnostic work, and in particular this is visible in the climate standard, and we are going to consider the rest of the SASB indicators as a possible source for our sector standards. Second, there is a transition provision in our ESRS that requires companies to cover on an entity-specific basis the sector dimension pending the issuance of our sector ESRS. And in doing so, we identify the SASB standards as a possible source for those disclosures. And third, we also, after the issuance of the transition of the ESRS sector standards, we will continue to refer to the SASB standards as additional possible guidance that could be on a voluntary basis included in the reports when the undertakings produce the SASB indicators, so reports on the SASB indicators in addition to the ESRS mandatory reporting. So we gained some experience in the activity of internationalization that you are also conducting, Corey. So our letter basically reflected the lessons learned so far, in particular in the work of sector agnostic, and for the first few sectors for which we have already produced drafts that have been developed also with involvement of the TAG in the past few months. And we agree and support the proposed methodology with a few indications of improvements. But we also highlight the importance of the enhancements that can be needed beyond the internationalization. And therefore, we disagree with the proposal to limit the changes if the changes may result already in this transition phase in enhancing the final result. And in addition, we consider that a more extensive activity of standard setting is needed on these standards. Again, is valid here, like I said at the beginning, the invitation to work together, and you were correctly pointing to the development of our sector standards as the key moment where we should develop interoperability between the two systems, and I couldn't agree more. And the XBRL taxonomy can only facilitate ex post after we have achieved a good level of interoperability in the standards themselves. So that's why we have included a number of suggestions for improvement. Some relate to climate. We know that you are not so interested in climate at this stage, but still we thought that it could be informative for the type of feedback that you may get once we progress with the other standards beyond oil and gas and the other input that we produced already to you as part of this draft comment letter. So with that, I think I can pass over to Saskia to...
Okay, so let's come back to what Chiara was saying, that the SASB material has been very important for EFRAG in developing its forthcoming EDs. You know that, well, you are probably familiar with the process that we had to refocus our work a little bit, but it doesn't mean that we haven't continued on the sector standards. So I'm going to look at Pedro, who is really the leader in this area for us and worked a lot with us even before he joined us on the sector's specific standards. What have we learned from using the SASB standards? Is there something that we sort of can convey to the ISSB that's worthwhile considering in this process for internationalization? And what would be your suggestions to the ISSB in this respect?
Yep. Thank you, Saskia. I mean, as Chiara was saying, we did use the SASB standards as a key source of information and best available practice for the development of our own initial first set of sector standards. We agree with ISSB that certain aspects are not say fully fit for international adoption and so need to be revised. And we think that the methodology proposed for this update by ISSB is a very sensible one and fit for the scope that has been proposed by ISSB. And I think also Chiara was pointing to this. We do think that the consultation is narrow in scope and limited to the internationalization, but there could be some benefit of doing a wider review to incorporate other aspects related to the evolution of sustainability reporting and corporate practice on sustainability. So aspects like target setting, transition planning, or evolution of certain metrics and methodologies, which actually, they really hit home when you have this sector lens and are developing the sector standards. We may have an issue here of timing. And of course, this timing coordination is always challenging. But, I think in the end, what we also want to highlight and stress is that independent of the scope, we agree that interoperability is really important, is something that we need to start building now, very early stages, and we are ready to work together with ISSB in making the sector standards as interoperable as possible, if and when that is needed, considering the potential timing issues with work in both organizations.
Thank you, Pedro. Sig, from the social perspective.
Yeah, thanks. Just very briefly. Absolutely. So, we also took a very close look at the SASB standards when we were working on the social standards. So we learned a lot from them, and we took over some of them. I'm thinking of the one on strike activity, for example, that wasn't taken over in the final recommendation, but something we'd like to introduce in the future. So I would say also for us, internationalization was a challenge in the sense that we had to at the same time address international standards and European standards. And you'll see some of our disclosure requirements are a bit complex, and that they refer to, I'm thinking of the adequate wage disclosure. It refers both to the adequate wage directive, but then it also references, adequate wages in other countries.
Sig, you're breaking up, I think. Oh, you were finished. You're okay?
I'm back here. Okay, so very sorry about my connection here. So this is not a burden that, or sort of a barrier that can't be overcome, but sometimes your disclosure requirements will get a bit complex. One thing I would say, we had a huge advantage in that we were working both on kind of sector agnostic and sector specific architecture, so that we were able to take this series of topics that are put in the CSRD. Some of them are pretty generic. So I'm thinking of working time, for example. There's so many specific aspects of working time that we couldn't address in the sector agnostic standard. But I'm thinking of, for example, evening work in mining or oil and gas. Often you have people stationed for weeks or even months at a remote location. I'm thinking of restaurants and hotels, a lot of evening work, a lot of work on the weekends. So with this architecture we could address these topics at a more generic level within the sector agnostic standards, and then drill down at the subtopic level in the sector specific standards. So I think that's a huge advantage we had with the architecture we're working with. Thank you.
Jenny, you have heard now Pedro and you have heard Sig. Is there anything you want to react to or give your perspective on?
I think it doesn't sound like disagreement. I should say that positively, right? I sense a strong agreement, a level of agreement here, and so that's fine. But let me just also, kind of re-emphasize that this exposure draft is now really looking purely at this internationalization, and because that's something we really need to cover in short time. So to have this available once our S1 and S2 are about to be used. And we do commit to, and that is part then of the request for information for prioritization of our different activities. And in there is one bucket or work stream on overall improving and enhancing the SASB standards. And, this would be then actually there to feed back and to kind of tell us to prioritize then on working on the SASB standards and having specific SASB projects in our pipeline. So more of a process clarification, but a strong level of agreement that I hear here, which is great.
Thank you, Jenny. And looking at my time watch here and knowing that people are moving on to other things if you're online. So I think on the questions that we got, we will look at them. Some have been addressed, others have not been addressed. Are more wider questions, sort of what is happening, both with how the SASB standards are integrated, but also questions about what is EFRAG doing on the sector specific, what is EFRAG doing on SME. So that could be a separate event here, but things are moving, as you know. The Commission has published their process for feedback last week, so for a period of 4 weeks. And we believe thereafter, after the first set of standards will be adopted, we'll be moving on a lot of things again. And if you are registered to our news items, you will learn about that. So I'll keep watching those, I would say. So I would really like to close with thanking, first of all the speakers, the panelists, the ones online. I'm not going to mention you all specifically one by one, but I also want to mention our colleagues organizing that. You see our back office at the back of this office. Video, Kaisha, Cecile, Paula is there. So thank to you. But I specifically want to thank you, Didier. In his circumstances, he has done a lot to get this all organized and make this all work. And we are very, very happy that it has been successful technically and content-wise, Didier. So very good. Thanks a lot for that. Thank all of you for your input to the polling questions and for the Q&A. They will, as I said, both serve the ISSB and EFRAG in developing this further. So thanks a lot for that. We would like to mention, can I have the next slide, Kaisha? That we would welcome your input to our 2 draft comment letters. So we have a draft comment letters, as Chiara presented and Corey referred to, on the SASB internationalization with a deadline of the 10th of July. To facilitate your life, basically we have made a survey which you can respond to but don't have to, so that it would be easy for us to assess your responses. And then for the ISSB Agenda consultation, so the request for information, EFRAG reaction on that is the 25th of July. We know, of course, that these deadlines are different from the IFRS Foundation, the ISSB deadlines, but if we want to be in time, we have to put our deadlines earlier. Now, it happens to be that it's just before the holidays, so it might serve you to finish everything before you go on holidays and give us your input. If you're not able to do so, we are also very happy to get your draft letters. They will, of course, be treated confidentially and you will not be uploaded, but then at least we know your views. So DJ is the person to contact on this if you have any further questions. For those in the room, he is sitting here next to me, so you can go to him directly. So I think that's all I want to say. I'm looking, Jenny, do you want to say anything, or Chiara? And
big thank you, EFRAG, thank you so much. That was extremely helpful for us. Thank you for setting all this up. Thank you for your very, again, diligent and detailed comment letters that came in also very, very timely. So thank you very, very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the feedback that we are receiving to then incorporate this into our work. Thank you very much.
So thanks to you all and good afternoon for the rest of the day. The sun is shining here in Brussels, hopefully as well in the rest of Europe, but it's pretty warm here.